I spent nearly 2 weeks researching Bessie Smith for this episode, and she's still a mystery to me. So much so that I couldn't even think of an introductory paragraph to set the scene, and I held off from compiling my notes and recording this one for quite a while. I know what she did in her life, I know what she's famous for, I sort of know how she died, but I don't know her. She was such a good performer in her day that I couldn't get a hold on her authentic personality. Was she a good person? Was she lost in a society that tried so hard to bar her from entry? Or was she vicious? Was she a violent force one was scared to cross and fell into submission under? Whatever the case may be, the mark she left in the music world continues to ripple ever outward, and many famous musicians hold their successful careers to her tireless contributions. Hi guys, my name is Mia, and welcome to another episode of Rainbow Relics. I am recording this directly after recording the Harvey Milk episode that I posted 2 weeks ago, so this is probably going to be just as chaotic with just as many dogs barking, so I'm very, very sorry. But wow, this is the ninth the ninth episode that I've done, and to commemorate the 10th episode, our first double digits, I've got something a little bit different that I want to do, that I'm pretty excited for. I haven't even started researching it or recording it, but I'm excited. I want to get it out. But yeah, that's 5th of April. That's due, I think, maybe, if I can keep a consistent upload schedule with I'm in university now, which is terrifying and fun and great, but oh my goodness, I can't get any time to do this. But yeah, that's a whole other story. This intro is still way too long. Today is all about the American blues singer and brilliant performer, Bessie Smith. I'm sure you've already guessed that Bessie was a nickname. It rolled off the tongue better than her christened name of Elizabeth, and that's what she went by. From the very beginning of her life, Bessie's story is met with controversy to the point where it reminded me of the swaths of contradictions I came across during my research for my Sappho episode. But bear with me, and I'm sure there will be some semblance of a clear picture of her life at the end of all of this. While popular opinion puts her birthday on the 15th of April, 1894, some people think she was actually born the July 2 years prior, and her production team changed it to make her seem younger. But that also seems to be a minority statement, so all ages I used for Bessie in this video put her birthday in 1894. Bessie was one of 7 children born to Laura Owens and William Smith. Her father, a Baptist minister, died before Bessie had the chance to remember him. Her mother died when she was 8 years old, but some sources say her mother died when she was 9 and 2 of her brothers died at the same time, and to make things even more confusing, the year of their death is listed as 1906, which would make Bessie about 12 years old when they died. Like I said, so much controversy in everything in this video. Orphaned with her siblings, the sources again can't decide what happened to Bessie. Either she and the rest of her siblings moved in with their aunt in Chattanooga, Tennessee, or she was raised by her older sister Viola, whom she stayed close to for her whole life. What people can agree on is that in 1912, inspired by her brother Clarence, who had left the family 8 years prior, Bessie joined a traveling performance troupe. She had gained experience in singing and dancing by performing on a street corner for money, with one of her older brothers playing the guitar as an accompaniment. Luckily for Bessie, nepotism is a wonderful invention, and the troupe she joined was none other than the very same one her brother joined before her, the Moses Stokes Company. Although she dreamed of being a singer, the troupe couldn't handle another chorus girl, and made her one of the stage dancers instead. But it was through this troupe that Bessie was destined to meet a woman who had one of the biggest impacts on both her life and African American mainstream music in general, the mother of the blues herself. There are just as many contradicting facts about the life and career of Mother of the Blues Ma Rainey as there are in Bessie's own story, so it is a poetic turn that their careers would be so intertwined. There is a widely populated myth that Ma Rainey, being so enraptured by the young dancer, kidnapped Bessie and indoctrinated her in the wild rites of lesbianism. And while this story does share a few events with real life, it's nothing more than a myth. Ma Rainey did nothing so violent as kidnap, but she did take Bessie under her wing to mentor her in the style of blues music, and between the two of them, they would go on to pioneer various subgenres under the blues umbrella. Ma Rainey was the singer for the second troupe Bessie joined at the start of her performance journey, the Rabbitfoot Minstrels. Together, the two women toured across the southern United States for about a decade. A lot of Ma Rainey's personal style of singing would go on to influence Bessie, but there were parts of her songs that were entirely herself, and they shone through under other women's tutelage and guidance. While it is fairly certain that Bessie was introduced to the queer side of show business through the openly lesbian mother of the blues, it is doubtful that they ever had a romantic relationship between themselves. On that note, it seems that a lot of the main African American audience that listened to blues music tolerated homosexuality and were open to having it stated in lyrics, such as one line of Bessie's 1927 song Foolish Man Blues, which goes, "There's a mannish acting woman and a skippin' twistin' woman actin' man." While very dated in its execution, the message is evident. And Ma Rainey's influence is also probably the fuse that lit Bessie's creativity, especially in her performance. For a short time in 1918, she experimented with drag. Her stage name was Liberty Bell Revenue, which, now if you look up, brings with it a bunch of women's gun clubs, and you don't need me to tell you that that's completely unrelated. I should do like a bloopers thing of all the weird, unrelated pages I come across when learning about these people. But I don't have the time. In 1920, Bessie started to show her independence in performing, and after Liberty Bell Revenue helped solidify the confidence she needed for her acts, she officially separated from Ma Rainey's sphere of influence and settled in Philadelphia. Here she got her first documented taste of musical production when she starred in the Dunbar Theatre staging of the famous at the time comedy How Come. I know very little about musicals outside of Heathers, so for all I know it could still be famous. And her talent for performance art did not go unnoticed. 3 years later, she would run into a talent scout from Columbia Records, and the partnership became a musical match made in heaven. But before that would come marriage. Although Bessie lived at a time when leaps and bounds were being taken for female liberation in the United States, just look at the smoking, automobile-driving flappers, for example, women were still expected to settle down with a husband and children. There may even have been a point where Bessie Smith and her husband, Jack Gee, were in love, but the relationship doesn't show that. Ever since the officiation of their marriage on the 7th of June 1923, waves of fear and distrust drowned the couple. As a security guard and having a lower social standing to his wife, maybe Jack felt emasculated by Bessie's power and thought he needed to keep her in check with violent, jealous outbursts. Or maybe they were not meant to have been with one another. This was also the time when her song Nobody Knows When You're Down and Out was written, but it would spend nearly a decade gathering dust before it was recorded and released. But we'll get to that later. Any marital struggles, and there are a couple of stories I'll get to in a minute, did not hinder Bessie's rising stardom. On the 26th of September, 3 months after she was married, Bessie released her first recording under Columbia Records. Marketed under the name Queen of the Blues as a parallel to Ma Rainey's Mother of the Blues, the recording Alberta Hunter's Downhearted Blues sold 800,000 copies and was an instant success. The media who covered her story confused her tag name, and thus Bessie Smith became the Empress of the blues that we know today. And Her Musical Majesty was in need of a business partner who already had the experience in the entertainment industry and could protect her from unforeseen scares. Who better to undertake this job than the same person who got her into the business in the first place, her older brother Clarence. Clarence was the person who insisted Bessie buy her own trailer for her and her performing entourage to travel in. And the road this trailer followed birthed veracious, romantic, and perilous stories, with perhaps the best known being the story of the dancer Lillian Simpson. At this point, Bessie was sharing her bisexuality. That's not a label she used, but a label I think best explains her experiences. I doubt a black woman in the 1920s was shouting her homosexuality from the rooftops, but Bessie did nothing to explicitly hide it either. In the music industry, almost anything was fair game, and everyone who worked with Bessie took her relationships in their stride, or their bed. Perhaps her closest confidant about her affairs was her niece, Ruby Walker. Ruby was a dancer in her aunt's performing troupe, the Harlem Frolics, and a friend of Lillian Simpson. Lillian desperately wanted to become a performer and begged Ruby to teach her the dance steps from the Harlem Frolics routine. After much nagging on Lillian's part, Ruby did, and Lillian went so far as to request an audition in front of Bessie herself. Bessie almost dismissed the young Lillian, claiming her show already had far too many dancers, but she watched the audition anyway. For some reason, Lillian's raw talent, Bessie's instant infatuation, or nepotism because Lillian's mom was Bessie's old wardrobe hand, Lillian was given the place in the troupe. I said that right. Lillian's mom, Bessie's wardrobe hand. Yes. Well, Lillian had started as Ruby's friend. On the Christmas of 1926, she fell far closer to Bessie. On the 1st of November that year, the Harlem Frolics were on their train riding towards their next show in Ozark, Alabama. Jack, who traveled with them on more than one occasion, was caught with a chorus girl, and the news quickly spread to Bessie. As soon as she heard of the affair, she stormed to the girl, beat her, and threw her off the train. Jack, who rushed to the sobbing girl's side, was an all too tantalizing target for Bessie, who shot at him with his own gun. Both Jack and the girl ran away from the train. And Bessie would use this incident as an excuse whenever she was unfaithful to Jack in the future. Now, in that very short section, there is a lot to unpack, and I can't possibly cover all of it. But I do have one or two words and thoughts. First, this is only 3 years after they were married. Personally, never been married, but I don't get the impression that having your wife shoot at you is meant to be a thing that you're hoping for, or screwing some probably underage girl on your wife's train. Not a great idea. Maybe using your husband's infidelity as an excuse for your own. Also not fantastic. Personally, again, haven't been married, not a marriage counselor, just like my own external opinion. I have no idea what compelled these two to get married, but by the end of this video, you will hate Jack and Bessie's relationship nearly as much as I do. And this sexual revenge quest is how Bessie and Lillian's relationship started, which is not good. Don't. No. Already there's a huge power imbalance in their relationship due to their ages and positions in the troupe. But I'm not actually here to shame their relationship. I just want to convince any young and impressionable lesbians this is, or young and impressionable anybody, it's not healthy. If there's someone in a position of power, if there's someone with a massive age gap, if you're 18, yeah, okay, legally you could sleep with a 40-year-old, but don't. Please. I can't see any way that is healthy. There's any 40-year-old who's wanting. It's fine. I'm going to talk about this in a different video. The first time they slept together to make their situation even less redeemable, both were drunk off Christmas party eggnog, but then after that their meetups became more frequent and more tumultuous. Nobody in the troupe really took any special notice of the relationship, not even Ruby, because all were far too worried that Jack would come back and bring his anger at Bessie with him. But Bessie didn't seem to mind any of it, and her performances all through the South brought large and adoring crowds of her fans. There was deep solace to be found in Bessie's music, even if she personally experienced it only briefly in her life. Tack on here that I made it sound like Lillian was 18 and Bessie was 40. That was not the age gap, that was just a example. I actually cannot remember how old Lillian was. I think it was young. I think it was very, very young. But we move on. We continue to follow the Harlem Frolics. On the 10th of January 1927, the Harlem Frolics began a week-long stay at the Booker Washington Theater, and it was here that Bessie saw Jack for the next time. The reminder of her marriage upset her relationship with Lillian and caused it to become even more tumultuous, resulting in them both refusing to talk to one another for 3 days. But the fourth day was different. Lillian didn't show up to the performance. Bessie was immediately worried, but she couldn't postpone the show and had carried on without her. After, when Lillian still hadn't made an appearance, Bessie's worry increased. And this was only exacerbated further when one of the dancers found a note under Lillian's hotel door and handed it to Bessie. Not even waiting to read it, Bessie rushed to Lillian's room, where the smell of gas coming from within it prompted the hotel proprietor to unlock the door for Bessie, Maud, the dancer, and Ruby. Lillian was lying on her bed and immediately rushed to hospital. Against all odds, she survived. After Lillian's quick recovery in hospital, the troupe's tour continued exactly as planned, because that's how it works in show business. Everyone piled into the trailer and made their way to their new hottest location, Cincinnati's Roosevelt Theater. The week after that, the Harlem Frolics opened at the Grand in Chicago, and this is where Lillian's anxieties increased. Even though after her hospital visit she became more bold and open about her relationship with Bessie, she was still terrified of Jack. Everyone was fully aware of his violence, and she feared for her safety. But after Bessie's pleading, she decided to stay with her. This change of mind was short-lived, however, and on the 5th of February 1927, when the troupe was in Detroit, Lillian officially left. Bessie was distraught and fell into alcoholic tendencies that forever plagued her life. She stayed with some of the dancers in a buffet flat, which, if you don't know what that is, I don't think I should explain it here. But she would drink there and watch more adult performances throughout the night to try escape her heartbreak. But she couldn't hide from the world, or Jack, for very long. One night at the boarding house the Harlem Frolics were staying at, Jack stormed in full of rage. He had caught Bessie in a compromising position with one of her dancers and wanted to take everything out on her. Luckily, because Jack was making so much noise, he alerted the troupe well ahead of time about his presence, and they managed to sneak out of the boarding house and escape into their train car. Thank goodness for Clarence's clever thinking all those years ago. The Harlem Frolics show itself had officially ended. But the end of the Harlem Frolics wasn't the end to Bessie's performing or her exploration of her sexuality. Later in 1927, she recorded and released the song I talked about earlier, Foolish Man Blues. But all her drama with Jack needed to come to an end before she could fully embrace her craft. It is unsurprising that both Jack and Bessie were more than likely suffering from some mental illness, but I'm not here to pathologize either of them. The fact still stands that in 1928, Jack Yee suffered from his first of many emotional breakdowns, and Bessie took time off recording and touring in order to look after him. But as soon as he recovered, she went straight back to having affairs and getting drunk as often as she could. Both of them needed some serious help, and they couldn't be that help for each other. Jack fell into his own old ways and beat Bessie as soon as he discovered her cheating. To make matters even worse, as a makeup gift, Jack asked Bessie to give him $3,000, which is, I think, if I'm doing my math right, nearly $50,000 today, to produce a show for her called Steamboat Days. Bessie did. She was excited for this project, but Jack ended up spending it all on a woman he was having an affair with, another blues singer by the name of Gertrude Saunders. Discovering this affair hurt Bessie more than the others had. Here was this skinny, light-skinned woman with barely any talent, according to her, and still her husband wanted her more than Bessie. Instead of producing Steamboat Days for Bessie, Jack got Gertrude to star in it instead. When she read about the production while in Amsterdam, Bessie broke down crying and ended her marriage with him. To explain the legality of Jack's revenge plot I'm about to tell you, I need to make it quite clear that their marriage ended, but they didn't get divorced. This meant that Jack still had the same rights to everything. Literally nothing changed except they didn't consider themselves together anymore. So Their adopted son, Jack Jr., was still Jack's right, and he very easily kidnapped the child. Jack brought the boy to the office of the Society of Prevention of Cruelty to Children and made up a long story about Bessie being an abusive and unfit mother. Under false neglect and endangerment charges, the courts ruled Jack Jr. to be given to Viola, Bessie's older sister. But later, this was deemed as being too close to Bessie, and the boy was sent back to his biological father, who routinely abused him. And just after this, Bessie released the song Nobody Knows When You're Down and Out, which, like I said, when it was written, it eerily mirrored her life's events, and now again when it was released, it seemed to be talking about events that had just happened. And while Bessie was trying to navigate personal turmoil, she was also about to experience one of the worst social upheavals in the history of post-industrialized United States. In 1930, the Great Depression and the Wall Street crash struck quickly and destructively all across the country. And the music industry wasn't spared. Bessie's sales plummeted, and a year later, she dropped her contract with Columbia Records. She continued touring to make any money that she could, but her success had all but vanished. She would keep her head above water as valiantly as could be expected. Against all odds, she began making new recordings in 1933 with producer John Hammond. But this new wave to Bessie's fame was doomed to be short-lived. In 1937, Bessie was driving to a new show with her close friend and flatmate Richard Morgan when, coming round a blind corner, they sideswept into a truck. There are multiple conflicting sources about how exactly she died, and I have linked a few of them, but this is my interpretation of the events, so please do take it with a pinch of salt. Quite a few sources say that Bessie's life could have been saved, but she was ignored to help this other white couple that had been involved in the crash, but I don't think that was true. I do believe that people really wanted to help Bessie survive. She was famous, she was important, and she was a hurt woman, but there was just no chance to help her. She was thrown violently from the vehicle after the resulting impact, almost severing her arm and damaging many internal organs. Paramedics apparently arrived on the scene a mere 30 minutes after the accident, but the nearest hospital was too far and her injuries too severe. Despite their best efforts, Bessie Smith died because of her wounds. A funeral was held for her on the 4th of October 1937, and 7,000 people attended. But her grave had no tombstone and remained unmarked for over 3 decades. It was not until Janis Joplin in 1970 commended her and her vast levels of influence from musicians like Billie Holiday, Laverne Baker, Elvis Presley, and Joplin herself did Bessie finally get a grave marker. It stands today, with an inscription that reads, "The greatest blues singer in the world will never stop singing."